Just minutes after his call, the situation worsened when the left engine also flamed out, leading to all lights shutting off and the deployment of oxygen masks due to the loss of cabin pressurization. In complete darkness, and with the aircraft's electrical systems switched to emergency configuration, the pilots struggled to control the aircraft, working hard to keep it flying. Meanwhile, the crew quickly prepared the passengers for a potential emergency water landing, aware that their chances of survival were slim. This is the story of Air Transat Flight 236.
All engines clear. Start at will.
On August 24, 2001, Air Transat Flight 236 was pushed back from the gate at Toronto Pearson Airport, Canada, with destination Lisbon Airport, Portugal. The route from Toronto to Lisbon crosses the Atlantic Ocean. Starting in Canada, it travels over the Western Atlantic, crossing towards the European mainland before reaching Lisbon. This flight typically takes about 7 hours. The aircraft designated for this flight was an Airbus A330, equipped with 362 passenger seats. Built in 1999, it had accumulated over 10,000 flying hours by the time of the incident. It was loaded with approximately 46.9 tons of fuel, 5.5 tons more than the minimum legal requirement. In the cockpit of the aircraft, there were 2 pilots. The captain was 48-year-old Robert Pichet, who had nearly 17,000 flying hours, with almost 800 of those on the Airbus A330. He was joined by the first officer, 28-year-old Dirk de Jager, who had accumulated 4,800 flying hours, 386 of which were on this specific aircraft type. 4 days before Air Transat Flight 236 took off, it underwent routine maintenance. During this checkup, the maintenance team discovered metal chips in the aircraft's oil filter, a sign of potential engine trouble. Unable to pinpoint the source of these chips, they decided to replace the engine. The engine being installed, loaned by Rolls-Royce, was in a pre-service bulletin configuration, while the replaced engine was in a post-service configuration. This difference caused an issue for the technician in charge. The rear hydraulic pump from the removed engine couldn't be fitted onto the replacement engine. The reason was a clash with the fuel pump inlet tube already installed on the loaned engine. Unable to access the service bulletins from the available computer terminals, the lead technician relied on advice from the maintenance engineering department. They recommended using only the rear fuel tube from the engine being replaced. By following this advice, the technicians were able to ensure there was enough space between the fuel tube and the nearby hydraulic tube. After installing the new engine, the technicians inspected the work and found no issues. The engine passed a ground run test, indicating it was functioning correctly, and the aircraft was approved for flight. Just before 1 in the morning, the Airbus took off. The pilots steered the aircraft eastward, ascending to a cruising altitude of 39,000 feet. The first hours of the flight went smoothly, with no issues on board. It was a calm and routine journey as the plane continued steadily toward its destination. But several hours into their journey, while halfway across the ocean, the pilots encountered something unusual. Upon checking the secondary display for engine readings, they spotted abnormalities in the right-hand engine's data. The oil pressure was unusually high, paired with a lower oil temperature and a decrease in oil quantity. These warnings presented a scenario that the pilots couldn't immediately understand. Normally, engine oil temperatures increase during a flight. So, when the pilots saw the oil temperature going down, they were confused. They looked through the manual to find an explanation, but they couldn't find anything that explained the strange readings they were seeing. The pilots reported the issue to their maintenance control center, asking for further investigation. However, the center also couldn't determine the cause of the problem. What the pilots didn't know was that the issues with the engine oil indications were caused by a massive fuel leak deep inside the right-hand engine. a serious mistake was made while replacing the engine. The hydraulic and fuel lines were placed too close to each other. Even though they believed there was sufficient space between them, they didn't consider how the pressure from the hydraulic system could affect them. During the flight, the hydraulic and fuel lines of the right engine were in continuous contact, slowly wearing down against each other. Eventually, this friction caused the fuel line to rupture, resulting in a significant hole. According to the final report, the aircraft was losing an estimated 12 to 15 tons of fuel per hour through this rupture, an immense contrast to the typical fuel consumption of about 2.6 tons per hour for an Airbus engine. But even with the significant fuel leak, the engine kept running as usual. The fuel system design of the aircraft plays a significant role in this. The fuel system of this Airbus is designed with multiple fuel tanks. Each wing contains 2 tanks, along with a center tank and a trim tank located in the tail's horizontal stabilizer. The trim tank serves the purpose of redistributing fuel from the back to the front of the aircraft to maintain its central gravity limits. As fuel levels decrease in the wing tanks, the trim tank automatically transfers fuel forward to the depleted wing tanks. This transfer is normally not scheduled to take place until 35 minutes from the destination airport, when the wing tanks are below 4 tons or when the aircraft descends below flight level 245. This process ensures a balanced fuel distribution for landing. However, in this instance, the trim tank initiated its final fuel transfer prematurely, directing all its remaining fuel forward into the wing tanks much earlier than usual. Despite there being an indication in the cockpit, the pilots did not immediately recognize the abnormality. While still dealing with the oil pressure issue, an advisory message flashed on the ECAM. It's the central display unit in the cockpit, and it alerts the pilots when action is needed. It was an advisory message. The message noted a fuel imbalance between the tanks in the left wing and those in the right wing. A fuel imbalance means that there's more fuel in the tanks of one specific wing than in the other, which is a problem because the aircraft needs to be balanced. When dealing with a fuel imbalance on the Airbus A330, there aren't any specific actions outlined in the ECAM. Instead, the ECAM simply alerts pilots to the imbalance, prompting them to refer to the Quick Reference Handbook for guidance. This handbook is designed to guide pilots through non-normal procedures. Given their familiarity with handling imbalances from simulator training, the captain decided to rely on their experience and memory rather than consulting the Quick Reference Handbook. They opened the cross-feed valve and shut off the fuel pumps in the right wing, intending to transfer fuel from one side to the other. However, unbeknownst to them, this action only worsened the fuel leak, as fuel was being directed from the left wing tank through the damaged right side of the aircraft. Had they consulted the QRH, the first instruction would have cautioned against proceeding with the checklist if a fuel leak was suspected. Within just 10 minutes, as they watched the fuel levels drop rapidly, the pilots realized that the total amount of fuel remaining on board had fallen below the level necessary to safely reach Lisbon. Facing this critical situation, they began exploring alternative landing sites. In the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, the pilots had limited options. They identified Leges Airport, located on the island of Terceira in Portugal, as a viable diversion point. As the pilots considered their diversion strategy, a cabin crew member entered the cockpit to inform them about passengers requiring assistance upon arriving at Lisbon Airport. The pilots explained the urgent need to divert to another airport due to a technical issue. They requested the cabin crew member to visually check the wings. Following the pilot's instructions, the crew member dimmed the cabin lights for a clearer view and used a flashlight to inspect the wings from the cabin windows. Despite the thorough check, no irregularities were detected. A fuel leak would be relatively easy to detect during daylight hours, but spotting one at night becomes significantly more challenging. Because there were no signs of a fuel leak other than the lower than expected quantity of fuel on board, and with no additional ECAM warnings or alerts, Both pilots concluded that the issue was likely a computer malfunction. The pilots considered doing the standard fuel leak procedure, but decided against it.
Could it be a fuel leak? Should we start with the standard fuel leak procedure?
No. We would then have to descend to a lower altitude, which would worsen the situation.
Understood.
Investigators later concluded that if the pilots had executed any of the prescribed fuel leak procedures upon diverting to Lages, whether it was the engine fuel leak procedure, the wing fuel leak procedure, or the fuel leak not located procedure, they would have landed with at least 3.8 metric tons of fuel on board. The captain's decision not to follow the fuel leak procedure was influenced by a common thinking mistake known as framing bias. This kind of bias happens when people get stuck on one way of looking at a problem and only pay attention to information that supports that view, while ignoring evidence that doesn't fit. In this case, the pilots thought the issue was just a computer error, so they focused on clues that seemed to confirm that idea. Because they were so focused on this belief, they didn't consider other important signs that could have pointed to a different problem. The pilots found themselves immersed in a whirlwind of tasks, communicating with maintenance control, conducting checklists, and coordinating with cabin crew and air traffic control for the diversion. Amidst this hectic environment, they struggled to find a moment to step back and reevaluate their initial assumptions. Despite their recent attempt to address the fuel imbalance by transferring fuel between tanks, the problem didn't go away, and fuel continued to drain rapidly. In reaction to the continued abnormally high rate of reduction in the fuel on-board quantity reading, the crew selected the right-wing fuel pumps to on and the left-wing pumps to off. These selections established cross-feed of the fuel in the right-wing tanks to both engines. The pilots then set a course for Lages Airport. They notified Santa Maria Air Traffic Control of their diversion, citing a critical fuel shortage. By this point, the aircraft was carrying 7 tons of fuel, which accounts for merely 6% of the aircraft's total fuel capacity. As the fuel levels kept dropping at an alarming rate, the captain maintained communication with the maintenance control center. In an effort to resolve the problem, he experimented with various configurations of the fuel system. However, despite these attempts, the amount of fuel continued to decrease. Any remaining doubts were quickly cleared when the right-hand engine flamed out, occurring as the aircraft was at flight level 390 and was 150 miles from the airport. In response, the captain swiftly increased thrust to the remaining engine. Although the aircraft could still stay airborne with only one engine functioning, maintaining an altitude of 39,000 feet was no longer feasible. At this critical juncture, the aircraft's fuel dwindled to a mere 600 kilograms. The pilots realized that they were facing a life-and-death situation. The first officer declared an emergency to air traffic control.
Mayday, mayday, mayday! Air Transat 236. The right engine has flamed out, and we're down to just a few hundred kilograms of fuel left.
Moments later, the first officer used the public address system to inform the cabin crew and passengers that they would be landing shortly and to prepare